Good morning. Well, the season is here. You look around, you see the Christmas tree, you look around town, you see lights, and I'm going to give you the okay. It is now socially acceptable to put up your Christmas lights. You're allowed to do that now. No one will get mad at you anymore. And though there are many things to say about Christmas, both good and bad, I would be lying if I said Christmas isn't my favorite time of year. I love Christmas. The laughter and the family and the food and people I typically only see once a year. It all happens around this time. And I can't help but smile when I see the lights and hear the music whenever I think about Christmas. And I wait all year for the Christmas season. But Christmas isn't the only time that I'm waiting. There are big events that happen throughout life that I wait for. A couple of weeks ago, one of my really good friends just got married, and I was waiting a long time. We were building towards that, and I got to wait and then watch him get married, and that was fantastic. I wait for vacations with my wife. We love backpacking and hiking, and I'm always looking forward to these vacations and waiting on that. And there's other things that I wait for that aren't really my choice, but I still end up waiting, like waiting for an elevator with people I don't know, or waiting in traffic trying to get home, which happens much more in Fort Worth than it does here. But I remember one specific instance of waiting, and it was my sophomore year of college. Casey and I had gone to Honduras on a trip, and we found ourselves in the Houston airport, flying on United, just throwing that out there. And we landed at 11 a.m., and our departure time was 2 p.m. They said, you will land, you have a little bit of time, and then you leave at 2 p.m. Well, sure enough, on the intercom, at right around 1:50, we got there early, we sat down, we waited, we were close to where we were boarding, and the intercom comes on, and they say, your flight has been moved to 5 p.m. We said, okay, that's all right, that's not too bad. So we get to 5 p.m., it starts coming, it's creeping up, 4:50, we hear the intercom again. I apologize for the inconvenience, but the time of the departure will be moved to 9 p.m. because we have lost the plane. Yeah, so we're like, okay, this is going to be all right. And so we're like, we're just going to wait until 9. Again, time rolls by, another 4 hours or so. Intercom comes back on. Hello, sorry for the inconvenience, but the departure will be moved to 11 p.m. We have found the plane, but cannot find the pilot. We're like, oh, all right. So we wait again until 11. They inform us that somebody's coming in. Another flight is landing. They're going to ask that pilot if he'll do one more flight to Oklahoma so that we can get back home. And long story short, the pilot comes. He denies the flight. We end up having to rent buses and drive all the way back from Houston to Oklahoma City. Enough said there. But the point is, when we're waiting, there's many emotions attached. In that specific instance, I wasn't feeling really peaceful or joyful as much as I was frustrated and kind of confused at how you lose a plane. And anyways, today we're going to be talking about and listening to Jesus talk about waiting. So the words should be on the screen here, but if you want to follow, we're going to be in Matthew 24, verses 36 through 44. I'm reading the ESV, so I hope this lines up. We'll see. But concerning the day and hour, no one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and one left. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake, and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So I don't know what feelings come to you after reading that. But for a focus on peace, that is not what I feel. Immediately, I'm struck with anxiety as I read these verses. I read them initially trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about over and over again, trying to pinpoint why do I feel so anxious. And for some reason, this story came to my mind. It made me think of this time when I was 10 years old. My friend and I, our favorite thing to do during the summertime at 10 years old was go to this water park in Fort Worth called Enter H2O. It stands for North Richland Hills H2O. What, clever. Anyways, while we were there were many slides and rides you could participate in, but our very favorite activity was going to the wave pool. Yeah, I'll be honest. I cannot remember the dimensions of this pool to save my life, but 10-year-old me thought this was like the Dallas Cowboys football stadium. This thing was humongous. And so we had a method. We would go and we would enter in the shallow end of the pool, and we would kind of like bob and weave through these strangers that we don't know towards the deep end. At this point in my life, I'm about 5 feet tall, and the deep end is 6 feet deep. Well, the pool was set on this cycle where it had waves for 5 minutes, and then it was 15 minutes of just a regular pool. You could kind of get in or out or move around, whatever. And then there's 5 minutes of waves again. It was back and forth. So the way that we would do this is we would go to the deepest end of the pool because it had the largest waves, and we would hold on to the side of the pool. And when the waves started, we would jump, and the waves kind of took us and acted like a bobber, kept our heads above water. And we loved this. But it only kept us busy for about 5 minutes because the waves would stop. So naturally, we had to find something to do during this 15-minute intermission to keep ourselves busy. So we would have breath-holding contests, or we would flip around so you could do the most flips in a row. Makes me nauseous thinking about it now. But another thing we would do is race from side to side in the deep end, which felt like 50 yards across a football field. I'm sure it's not that, but my memory is so vivid on this. Anyways. So, this particular day, I was feeling extra confident. I knew that the bell was about to ring and the waves were about to start, but I really thought I could make it to the other side. So I, as you might suspect, started swimming across the pool, and right in the middle of the pool, surrounded by strangers, the waves start. I hear the bell. I'm immediately plunged underneath the water. And I remember struggling for air and I was out of sync. I had exhausted myself for the last 15 minutes swimming around being crazy, and I couldn't fight against these waves. I remember the intense feelings of anxiety and fear. And after 5 minutes of struggling, thankfully it ended, and I was out. I was more cautious after that. But that story, these same words for Jesus, reveal the same truth as that day at the water park. It turns out that I am scared to death of what I cannot control, as we all might be. In that wave pool, I was completely powerless. I had no control over what would happen to me, and that was terrifying to think about. Jesus is saying 3 things in these verses that put us in a similar position. Essentially, these verses say, 1, God is going to show up. He's coming. Number 2, he says, you have no idea when that's going to happen. God's going to show up. And then number 3 says, but make sure you're ready when God shows up. So these verses throw us into this position of waiting where we really don't have any control. And so the question here that we're asking today is, how should we wait on God in this time? How should we wait on God? For much of my life, I had a really clear answer to this. From those that I watched and looked up to and the preaching that I heard, I thought that we waited on God by trying to rid ourselves of sin. Paul has all these lists and letters that seem to speak with so much clarity about what's right and what's wrong. The way we waited on God, therefore, was by ridding ourselves of the wrong things and gripping to the right things, clinging to what's right. Basically, my mission was to try and perfect myself so that if at any time God showed up, I'd be ready, presenting my best self to God. Kind of like when you speed clean and you try to get your house all ready right before company shows up. I have done that literally any time company showed up. Casey's like, I'll grab the mop, I'll grab the broom. Anyways, so if you ever want to come over. But like cleaning your house, having company over, I was going to try and clean myself before God arrived. But it's interesting that Jesus doesn't describe God as invited company. If we look at those verses, he describes God in a much more peculiar way, showing up in a much more peculiar way. In verse 43, Jesus says, "But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into." In this statement, it seems that Jesus is comparing God to a thief. So let me ask you, have you ever cleaned your house for a thief to be robbed? Of course, you've not done that, and neither have I. A thief doesn't come when you've had this perfectly spotless home. A thief does not see your nicely presented idea of who you want to be, but instead sees it as it truly is. The thief comes at the night when you're unprepared. The shoes are out. The toys from the kids are out. They haven't been put up yet. There may be dishes in the sink. You haven't vacuumed, and there's no scented candles lit. That's the home that the thief walks into. You try to make it look perfect, but he sees it as it truly is. Jesus describes the coming of God in this way because God wants more than our perfect image, than the one we try to push forward to everybody, the church face. Everyone knows what I'm talking about with that. God wants our true selves, the real us, the self with doubts and insecurities, aches and pains, anguish and imperfections. God wants all of us, not just the good parts. And you see, I'm the man that Jesus was talking about in verse 43. I heard that God was coming, and my defense plan was to lock the doors, build the walls, make sure that I was ready, because I wanted to try and control the way that God saw me. Just like fighting against the waves, I felt anxiety and fear as I struggled to gain control while waiting for God. I truly thought this was what it meant to wait for God to show up, trying to create this perfect image. But the difference is this: we know the thief that is coming. One of my earliest memories was when I was 4 years old. To this day, I remember this so vividly. Christmas morning, at about 5 a.m., I slowly made my way into the living room. My heart was pumping. I was so excited to see if Santa had showed up. As I turned the corner of the hallway, I saw the tree. The first thing when you turn the hallway in my house, you could see the tree. And if it was lit up, that means Santa had come. I see the tree lights on, and I was like, he's been here. There's something over there. He's been here. So I turn around, and as I keep going into the living room, I pan across, and my eyes lock on the fireplace. Well, at that moment, I kid you not, I saw Santa Claus as he was going up the chimney. Like, I saw the back of his legs so clearly. His red pants were facing me as he was exiting up the chimney out of my home. And in that moment, I remember feeling completely overwhelmed, but not with joy, not with excitement. I was terrified. Okay? I screamed at the top of my lungs, sprinted into my parents' bedroom weeping because I realized this man was in my home that I didn't know. And I had never thought about it. I was terrified. I mean, that talk about fear and anxiety. Well, as my startled parents calmed me down, they walked me into the living room and turned on the lights. So I slowly looked back at the fireplace, and on the fireplace was this large skyscraper toy that was bright red, vividly resembling Santa's legs. Just throwing it out there. And they reassured me that I shouldn't be scared on Christmas. Because Santa doesn't come and steal. Santa comes and brings gifts. He doesn't take away, he breaks in and he gives more. And quite obviously, the gifts that Jesus brings are much more than these material possessions or consumerism or whatever you want to say about Christmas. But the same principle does apply. This God that is showing up is the God that promised the earth would never be flooded again. This God that's showing up parted the Red Sea to protect his people, guided kingdoms throughout history, spoke justice and mercy through the prophets. This God came to earth as a baby in the most vulnerable form he could, and then demonstrated undeniable self-giving love on the cross. That's the God that's going to show up, and that's the God we're waiting for. We know what God is coming. So yes, we wait and hope for Jesus to return at the end of the age, the end of time. All throughout the New Testament, this hope's proclaimed. But in another sense, we also wait for God to show up in life each and every day, often at unexpected times. I can think of many instances where God showed up and I did not expect it. Caught me off guard. I've seen God show up in a person that I had met and written off as a lost cause. I was like, they're not worth my time. Jesus help them because I can't. You know what I'm saying? And they turn or do something or say something, and I see God. God shows up in that person. Another place I've seen God show up is in really mundane situations. I'll be shopping at the grocery store, or I'll be cleaning the floor or serving coffee. I mean, something I do all the time. And all of a sudden, I become aware that God is here. And we're all interconnected in such a deep way. God shows up there. And also in moments where I didn't see it at the time, as I look back on life, I become deeply aware that God's been there in the worst times. I remember my uncle dying and how hard that was for my mom. But I remember our family coming together. And I remember the goodness that came out of that. It's hard to see when you're in it, but when I look back at where I've felt my lowest, where I've seen others at their lowest, God's there in an unexplainable way. So, to come back to the words that Jesus spoke and the question at hand, how should we wait for God to show up? Well, we shouldn't wait with fear and anxiety, struggling to control the way that God sees us. No, rather, we should wait for God as a child waits for their parents, with joy, excitement, and hope. For just as the child knows the love of their parent that's coming home and is excited to jump into their arms, we look forward to God showing up because we know the loving God that's promised to come back.